Welcome back to the Constitution Line by Line. I'm Paul Fabrizio.
I'm Dr. Frazier. Clearly something has happened off camera because he looks so bemused. But he's a political scientist, so you can forgive him for that.
Look at politics is fun.
And I'm a historian.
Right? Isn't politics fun?
It's a lot of fun. It's a full contact spectator sport.
You better believe it. What would history be like without politics?
It would be
boring.
Yeah. And the reason being is that history is about people.
Yeah.
And you use as your sources that are generated by people. And politics is about the polis, which is the people. So, yeah, they're kind of intertwined.
Yeah, and I tell my students that politics is simply human interaction with a goal towards having power.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, it happens any place. It happens on athletic teams. It happens in fraternities, sororities. It happens in work. It happens in families. It happens here in this studio.
Absolutely.
Off camera, we fight each other.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly right. He used to have hair. Then I scalped him. But I guess that kind of makes political science the geeky cousin of history.
I hate it when he does that. Jab.
All right, so what's our line?
Okay, we are in Article 1.
No, we're not. We're in Article 2.
I'm sorry, we're in Article 2. We're talking the presidency. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3. The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. So,
Election day is uniform.
Yes, Election day is uniform, and also the Electoral College meeting is uniform as well.
Okay. So you can't have one state's results coming in and
and then other
state number 2 going, well, they went this way, we'd better go, this way or that way.
There's a reason why everybody votes at the same time. And so what we talked about before was the Electoral College has been replaced, but we're with the new one in the 12th Amendment. But what we're still dealing with is this article in the Constitution, which outlines the whole process of the Electoral College. And this part that we just described still exists. And the election, of course, the national election is held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November.
Yep.
And then the Electoral College gets together in December. And usually it's I think it's the second or third week in December.
Yeah, it's getting towards Christmas.
Yeah, and they meet, they cast their votes. I believe it's usually a Monday, and what happens is the electors, and each state gets to determine the exact place, but usually they go to their state capital.
Sure.
And they get in one of the legislative chambers there, and they cast their votes there. And then the votes, as per the Constitution, are sent to Washington, D.C., and they're counted.
Opened in the Senate.
They're opened in the Senate. And in the election of 2000, it was really it was fascinating to watch because there was Al Gore as the Vice President of the United States, but President of the Senate, counting the votes in which he lost as the candidate for president to George W. Bush.
Yeah.
And that was a highly contested election that in the end was decided by the Supreme Court. And there was Al Gore, I would argue, really rising to the situation. He had an opportunity to be bitter, an opportunity to contest the election. And instead he said no, the Supreme Court has decided it. And so he was fair and above board, and they counted the votes, and George W. Bush was declared the president.
It's remarkable how often that is the case. I mean, the people that are elected president don't try to cling to power past their time. I mean, with the notable exception of FDR running for a third term.
And then a fourth.
And yeah, he was just going to be president for life. He just ran out of life. Back to the uniform day.
Yeah.
So today when we have an election, there's time zones, and there's wall-to-wall coverage. So the East Coast polls close well before California.
Yes.
So does California's vote
get influenced by the East Coast.
That's where I'm going.
And that's something that it's very difficult to prove or not prove. We often look to the election of 1980.
Okay.
Jimmy Carter running for re-election, Ronald Reagan running for election for the first time.
Sure.
And Jimmy Carter conceded the election before California had finished voting. In other words, the results from the East Coast were already so well known.
Yeah.
I mean, it was clearly going to be a victory for Ronald Reagan.
A big one.
That, therefore, Jimmy Carter stepped out and conceded the election before the West Coast had finished voting. And there's some who say that it suppressed the Democratic vote out in the western states. And as a consequence, it didn't matter in the presidential level, but it mattered in some of the lower level seats, Senate, House of Representatives.
The down ticket
races.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then, of course, we always forget, and it's just the way it is, but nobody ever pays attention to Alaska and Hawaii.
Yeah.
And typically,
Hawaii's got a lot of time zones out there.
Yeah, exactly. And so typically we all vote in the continental United States, and then the announcers are very willing to go and say, okay, we're going to call the election for this or that, and we're still waiting for 2 more states to finish their voting process. So
how do you fix that?
You can't fix it. I mean, it's
could you make them go to the polls at 2 a.m.
in the morning? Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Here in Texas, we have the same issue because one of our major cities, El Paso, is in a different
1
time
hour
zone
behind, yeah,
than the rest of the state. So there's a tendency to just ignore El Paso, and the rest of the state wants to have their results known. And but El Paso still has to vote.
The free state of El Paso.
The free state of El Paso. So that's just, it's imperfect. There's no getting around it. The whole thing is imperfect, but it's hard to come up with a better system.
Yeah. As flawed as it is.
Yeah. So I feel sorry for the people in Alaska and Hawaii, but they live in beautiful places.
They should go down to the State House and say, open the polls at 2 a.m.
That's right.
And then close them at about 8 a.m.
And then it'll be cool.
And we'll all have breakfast together. And they could turn this into a great celebratory event.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it all the way dark?
Almost in Alaska.
At
least parts of Alaska. The land of the midnight sun.
That's right. So
but that's in the summer.
That's in the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is going to be in the winter. So I mean, it's already dark and gloomy. So you might as well just go do something dark and gloomy.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Anyway, there you go.
That's our line.
That's it.
Pretty simple, kind of a housekeeping line. Maybe there'll be something a little peppier in the next clause.
Oh yeah. I think we're going to do qualifications for president.
All right. So that'll be what we talk about next. Thanks.